So I am in Southern California. I have lived here with my husband for about 24 years. And I know 24 years. It's a very long time. My husband and I are parents of two kiddos that we adopted from the foster system in LA County. And they moved in 13 years ago at ages 6 and 7, siblings set to 10 months apart. And we were the 9th placement for our 7-year-old at the time and the 7th placement for our 6-year-old. So they had a whole history of moving from home to home and experiencing a lot of reject and eject in their experience of how adults see them, how the world sees them, how systems see them. And they land on our doorstep. And boy, howdy, did we learn a lot from right there. And at the time, I was in seminary thinking I was going to go and be a worship pastor. And through all of this, God made it incredibly clear that I had a different role to play in the world, because my journey with them helped to tease out my own complex developmental trauma that I was not aware of because it had been so normalized. And in our healing journey together, we have all grown. And so my babies are now 19 and 20. And while they have very different healing trajectories, we know that the things that I'm going to talk about today matter and make a difference because we've been able to see it. So that's where that comes from. I've had a lot of different kind of roles since my babies moved in. One of them has been as a pediatric chaplain at children's hospitals. I've also worked in a nonprofit setting, building programs for foster, adoptive, and kinship families. And eventually that led me into more of this systems work, which is how do we really scaffold the families and the people around the families who've experienced, or individuals who have experienced trauma, and how do we do that well in all the different sectors. So even this last week, we had our first Trauma-Wise Ministry Summit where people from around the world came to learn about how can they apply trauma-informed ministry practices in their settings, whether it's in a workplace, whether that's in a volunteer space, or even into a congregational or parish space. And what's been beautiful about that conversation and really lights my heart up is this realization and awareness that our connectedness and our relationship is the key to the healing. We see this all throughout Scripture, and so it's been just a beautiful 3 days to experience that with people from around the world. And so I'm really excited to share that with you here. So Trauma-Wise, I'm going to give you the mission statement. Ready? Hold on. We equip change agents to transform broken systems by activating trauma-informed communities. That's right. I said it all in one breath. I've got it all. And what that simply means is that every person lives in a space with people around them in a community, in places. And in that local space, there are people who look around and say, this is not okay. This is not okay. Something needs to change. And sometimes they're hooked up with other people who can find a way forward to start to make change. And sometimes they need some scaffolding and support. And so what Trauma-Wise does is to give frameworks and guidance and mentorship, walking alongside people in their local context to make those changes. Because I think we can look around and recognize that maybe some of those structures at the top, no matter what area we're in, they don't have all the answers. And in fact, it takes every single one of us doing our part in relationship, but it feels really overwhelming. So that's why I say, don't worry, we got you. We're here with you to walk alongside. So that's what Trauma-Wise is doing in the space. So I think I did that fairly concisely, Lindy.
You did, Renae. Yes, everyone. So as you can tell, that's why I was so excited to have Renae. She's passionate about equipping communities, right? That we can't only have professionals be the ones knowing about trauma or some of the basics about responding and caring for people with trauma histories, including ourselves. And I think that's really practical and something that here at EMA, we want to equip our advocates, equip our teams to know some of the basics. We can all do something, right? And we don't have to be clinicians, right? We have to kind of know our place. So I love that. I love that passion, that fire that you have for that, Renae. And I'd love to get us into the topic. Let's just start with Obviously, Renae and I, we've been able to work together when I lived in California some, and we've done some trainings together. But I would love, Renae, for you to just kind of walk us into, like, for those of us on the call that may be like, how is relationship and DNA even? Where and how do those connect? I would love for you to just like give us the basics. What do we need to know about that? And how is that even a thing?
Absolutely. So this is, when I learned about this, I was working at my nonprofit, and we had offices that were at opposite ends of a strip mall. We rented those too. And I was in my office and I was learning about this information, and it caused me to leap out of my seat and run over to the other side and share it with everybody. That's how excited I am about this. So what we know is that each one of us has a biological impact on the person in front of us, the person that we're engaging with. And it's this really neat thing that our brains, our amygdalas, and our nervous systems have conversations without us even having words. And you know this because when you walk in a room and you see that person who you know has that sour face that's on, or the storm clouds, or if you've ever been around a teenager ever and they're having the mood, you know that your body has a response to that. And you're like, okay, right? No words have been exchanged, but you can feel what's going on with the other person. And it causes a biological response inside of you. And so it could be that you take the big sigh to prepare yourself for what's coming. It could be that you're like, I'm going to go. It could be that you get cranky. It could be you get defensive. It could be whatever it happens to be. But you have a biological automatic response to someone else's reality, right? So we experience that all the time, day in, day out. And so knowing that the parts of our brains that are talking to each other are the parts of our brains that are meant to keep us safe. And our brains do a very, very good job of keeping us safe. In fact, you can congratulate your brain. It has made you safe. Thus far, you have not died. Congratulations. You've made it to May 23rd, 2024. Good job. And it's because you have this amazing system inside of you that is constantly scanning for what is safe. What is safe? Are these people safe? Is this place safe? Do I understand what's going on? And how we understand that is built by neural pathways of experience. The ways that we engage over and over and over with people, the ways that our needs are addressed or not addressed, the ways that people respond to us, the way that we can make choices or have an impact in this world or influence, and how often that happens and how it's received, and if we're seen, heard, and valued. All of those things build neural pathways, and they have very specific messages. And so I'll show you a graphic about that in just a moment. But the thing that was very exciting for me was that there's a neuroscientist named Dan Siegel. He's written a lot of really great books and done a lot of good information sharing that's freely available, and then some, of course, that's to be paid for. But he was speaking at a trauma summit, and he was talking about that in our makeup of our genetics, of our cells, if we're going to go all the way back to like 7th and 8th and 9th grade biology. I'm sorry if that's triggering for anybody, right? You can feel those like black tables, and then they're sitting next to people and smell the Bunsen burner. But we're going back to biology for just a moment, and you remember that we have cells, and that the way that we grow, that everything that with a cell grows is it divides and replicates. It divides and replicates. It divides and replicates, and that's how everything grows, right? Everything grows that way. And so what happens is we have that helix structure, that ladder structure that we can think of when we think of DNA, like from all those science movies. And that ladder splits in half, and half of it goes in one side of the cell and the other goes in the other. And then the cells close up, and that DNA replicates and turns into a full ladder. And that happens over and over and over again. So whatever the DNA, which is the makeup of all the different things for us, there's that spreading across those cells and growing. It sets in whatever that entity is going to experience. Okay, have I lost anybody so far? We doing all right? I'm checking.
I think we're hanging in. Great.
Okay. So at the end of these ladders, there are these little caps. And think about it like the shoelace cap, right? The cap at the end of your shoelace, and it's there to keep your shoelace from unraveling, right? Because how many times have you tried to take a unraveled shoelace and put it through that hole? It doesn't work very well, and it gets messy, and then it gets wet and soggy, and it's a whole thing, right? But what happens if that happens with with cells? In that DNA, when that ladder splits in half, if that cap isn't really strong, that DNA starts to disintegrate. And that cell is formed with disintegrating DNA. And the next cell is formed with disintegrating DNA, and the next. And that's where we get things like cancer, anti-inflammatory issue, or inflammation, autoimmune issues. All of these physical issues that we experience come from that there's been something in the DNA that has not formed fully and correctly. Okay, so far we got it, right? Cells split, we want those really strong things, and those are called telomeres. And there's an enzyme at the end of it that's that strong cap, and it's called telomerase. Our bodies make that enzyme. Okay, and here's what Dr. Dan Siegel said that blew my mind. The only way that we replicate that telomerase in our body is through mindful, meaningful relationship. When we are connected to each other and we are seen, heard, valued, when we tune in with people, when we're able to create spaces for people to express their stories, to be heard, to be delighted in, when we problem solve together, when we laugh together, when we cry together, that mindful meaning relationship releases the enzyme that strengthens our DNA. That DNA, that enzyme that is at the end of those caps gets worn away by two things: aging and toxic stress. Right? Those things that we experience in our lives that are traumatic wear away the end of those telomeres, but we can bring back and strengthen that DNA in mindful and meaningful relationship. And I stood up and I ran to the other office and I said, "Oh my goodness, we were pretty sure that this relational stuff that we're doing, that walking alongside people and making safe space and being non-judgmental and help making sure that they are seen, heard, and valued, we knew it was important, but we didn't know the science, and the science completely backs it up." And that is the quickest science lesson I think I've ever given, Lindy.
But I feel like I'm sitting over here and I'm like, I think I need a moment to just feel the like mind blown emoji happening, right? Thank you for breaking that down for us. Right? I think most of us are here because we're caring. We believe people matter, right? We to whatever degree, if we're showing up here at Every Mother's Advocate, we believe that relationship and people matter, right? And to have that understanding of how biological, how scientific all of this is rooted, as well as within our faith, right? Of like people have dignity and worth, and so we're going to live that out by these actions. Like this is just such an amazing piece to that puzzle as well, to the whole picture. So thank you. You did a great job, though I know, to my knowledge, you're not a science teacher, but well done. I want to mention to everyone as well, if you've got questions, feel free to type those in the chat. I will try to be watchful for those throughout, and I can pause and pivot with Renae about that. But such a loaded and beautiful concept of how powerful relationships are for our own lives, for our volunteer work, for our professional spaces. I think it gives it more weight, right? When we understand the gravity of it. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And I'm curious too, maybe on the other side of that, Renae, what would you say to where there is not, like if the safe, trusting, valuing, delighting relationships are not available or are minimal, like what are the consequences of that? Obviously you spoke to some, but I'd love for you to just kind of point blank speak to that as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go to, if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to go to a graphic just because I feel like that just give us a moment to take a look at this attachment cycle here. And so if I'm sure that at some point you have seen something like this, and this is, as I'm talking about this, and I know that there are scientific and technical things that are listed here, but I also want to just take a moment to say that our mamas have always known, like the wisdom of the elders, of the mothers from which we came down through the lines, have always known about what I'm about to talk about. So you don't have to be a doctor, that every culture has known this and has communicated it in some way through the mothers when they say, hey, it's not good for the baby for you to be so stressed out. Okay, so this is this understanding that we have this impact, and that as little ones are with us and around us, and we're engaging with them, that how we engage, how we meet needs, how we see them, that it has this impact. And again, this has been known. So I don't ever want it to be that I'm coming in as some kind of scientific expert with these words, because every one of us has this wisdom at some level inside of us. So I just wanted to say that. I should have said that earlier, but I want to say that now. Okay, so if we're looking at this cycle here, you see at the top it says need expressed. And so that can be a person at any age has a need that's expressed. And if they are not able to meet their need and they start to feel some level of distress, that's when we know that their cortisol and their adrenaline and their excitatory neurotransmitters and their sympathetic nervous system all come online to help to communicate to the world around them, I have reached the end of my capacity to get my need met. And if at the bottom here, we see that the need is met, that means that the person who is meeting the need is helping to regulate that nervous system to say, hey, I've got you, you're not alone. And we know that it has this biological chemical flow of the person being able to calm their excitatory neurotransmitters with inhibitory, which means it's calming down, that there's a person who is walking alongside, who is bearing witness, who is seeing, who is telling the truth, who is maybe giving words that they may not have as they're expressing their need. It's helping to make sense. And that over and over and over again forms that message of, I'm seen, heard, and valued. I have a voice. But if it's not met, and it can be for any reason, it has a very different outcome. So I'm going to stop the sharing here. So the messages of secure attachment, when we've had that go over and over again, are through like three main ones. I have a voice. I can negotiate my needs. I am precious. I matter. And it starts from infancy, when we're holding that little one, when the baby says, I have a need. Right? It doesn't say, excuse me, can someone please change my diaper? It cries, it gets rigid, it turns red, it lets you know, I have this need. And when we come and meet the need, it experiences that people will stop and pay attention, that they will travel with them, that they will validate them. And so they have a voice, their needs matter, they matter, and they are precious. If we don't experience that over and over again, it's the opposite. It's the I don't have a voice. I can't negotiate my needs. I am not precious, and I don't matter. It feels really weighty. So if you want to take a breath with me, we can take a breath, because that's the reality for a lot of people. In fact, it's the reality now for more people than ever. Back when Lindy and I started doing this work, the majority of people were reported to have secure attachment, and that is not what is reported anymore. In fact, we know that disorganized attachment, which is I have no strategy, is up to 20% of the mainstream population. And for people who've experienced trauma, whether it's in the foster care system, whether it's in incarceration, whether it's in any of these really high risk spaces, the number is even higher. And it's not, we didn't choose our attachment strategies. That style that we have is based on what we were experienced from primary caregiver and from other relationships as we are growing and going through life. But those people didn't choose theirs either, right? So I just want to say, like, very clearly, it's not that somebody chooses not to be able to show someone that they matter or don't matter. It's based on their own strategies, right? And so even in where there's been a power differential that's not safe, or there's been abuse that's happened, that's not okay, and we don't excuse that behavior, but we can understand that there was something even in that person's history that has led to their inability to be able to provide that. And so we don't forgive the behavior, but we can provide grace for the person to say, I'm aware. It doesn't mean I have to be in a relationship with them. Doesn't mean I have to be in a relationship with them. I'm going to be in my safe and healthy relationships because I need to heal my DNA. I need to heal my heart, mind, body, and soul. And then I can be that for other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah, man. That's making me think of just the ACEs study, right? And what we know about that, of the adverse childhood experiences. Most certainly we want to walk into this volunteer space of walking alongside mothers, being very aware there are some hard things in her history that led her to this moment. And like you're mentioning, a lot of it not by her choice. Some of it may be by her choice, but story by story. But we want to be very sensitive and aware of the adversities, whatever they looked like in her history. So I'd love to just invite you, Renae, to speak to some of our audience. Like we've probably heard of the ACEs, of adverse childhood experiences, and this is an ongoing conversation, right? Like if it's a refresher or it's the first thing, let's talk through that. I'd love to just have you talk through ACEs for a little bit.
Absolutely. So ACEs was a 10-year study that started in the mid-1990s, and it was these two doctors and scientists that were in different fields across the country. One of them is Dr. Rob Anda, and he was at the CDC, and he was trying to figure out, why do people start and stop smoking, and particularly looking at why teenagers started smoking. What's behind that, and why do they make that choice? The other doctor was Dr. Folletti, and he was working at Kaiser Permanente at an obesity clinic down in San Diego. And as the two of them were trying to figure out what they were seeing in their data, and Dr. Folletti's, the way that it really exploded for him, is that at this obesity clinic in San Diego, through Kaiser, they had really good success numbers. What they did is people came in and they said, okay, let's work on how we're going to eat. Let's work on how we're going to move. Let's get you into the support group community. And people did really, really well. They lost weight. They got healthier. They had a better quality of life. And they would graduate from the program, and they would go home, and they would eat the same. Because they would track, they would move the same. And for some of them, the weight would come back. And he was trying to figure out why was the weight coming back if the factor was that they no longer had this consistent support group. How would that possibly have such an impact on whether people could keep the weight off or not? And so he started to look at the data that he had from the people when he was looking at their health history. Could there be other factors? And he was looking through patient histories, and what he found was that over 50% of his patients that had come through the clinic had been sexually abused before they were 18 years old. And so there was this flash moment for him of maybe there is something that's going on in histories that means that when people don't have safe relationship, their body is responding. Even if they're doing all the right things, their body is having a response that says, I'm not safe and I need to put this weight on. And so as he's talking about this in the medical community, and he's sharing, and he's starting to interview some of his patients and talk to them about their histories, and talk to them about the woman who said that when she went through the clinic, it was great. She felt really healthy. She went back to her workplace and started gaining back the weight. And the doctor was talking to her and said, hey, what's been going on? Here's what we're noticing. Again, without shame or blame, we're just trying to understand. And she said, Well, when I went back to work, the things that have been stressing me out is that I have two supervisors who sexually harass me. And so that movement out of safe relationship into a space where she didn't feel safe, her body, if you think about it, like this makes total sense. Her body's like, how can I make sure that you are no longer as attractive, are no longer as accessible, that you have protection? I'm going to put that weight back on. And so there'll be things that we in history of people that we don't know about, and then we'll look at and say, well, why did you choose this? Why would you do these things? And they were just at the beginning of this study to say, like, there's some correlations here. So somebody got them together. They did this study. They sent out 24,000 surveys to Kaiser Permanente patients in Southern California and San Diego, and 17,337 people responded to this multi-question survey. They were able to pull the 10 most common things that people experienced before they were 18 years old that had a relationship to behavioral and health outcomes later in life. And so those 10 things became the ACEs questionnaire that you might have been exposed to or might have seen. And so they could see that each one of these 10 categories, whether that was physical or emotional or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, incarceration of a caregiver, domestic abuse within the home, a caregiver who was under the influence, who's had an addiction, divorce or separation, and I'm forgetting the other one, which I can't believe I'm doing. If anybody remembers it, put it in the chat, because I can't remember all of a sudden, because I don't have my graphic. But you remember?
I'm blanking as well. I'll look it up.
All right. Whatever that is. Oh, mental illness. Sorry, mental illness. So if a parent or if a caregiver was dealing with mental illness, so these 10 categories, right, of the toxic stress had these stress doses, and as people, the more that people experience of those, they could see, oh, your likelihood of having asthma, COPD, depression, anxiety, suicide attempts, dissatisfaction on the job, injuries at workplace. I mean, there are all hundreds of different health and behavioral outcomes that they can absolutely track the relationship between what people experience in childhood and what they experience later in life. That really blew some things up. And part of the reason it blew some things up is the people who were answering the survey, who were in San Diego, were in the mid 1990s. They could afford health insurance. They had a job. So they had a job. They could afford health insurance. They were predominantly white. They were predominantly middle upper class, and they were predominantly college educated. And what they found in that group of people is that 64% of them had experienced at least one adverse childhood experience in their life, right? So the majority of people had experienced childhood trauma in this. And I look at that and I say, that's kind of a protected group, right? That's kind of a group that you wouldn't expect that 28% had been sexually abused, right? And that all of a sudden, it took down this barrier and this wall to say, oh, maybe it's not those people over there. Maybe this is a little more widespread than we thought, which tells us that if we look at places that have even less support, there's a really good chance that the numbers are going to be higher. And where the numbers are actually the highest, groups of people who help. Groups of people who help, the higher the ACEs are. And that becomes from this thing that is actually beautiful about humans, is that we already inherently know that we are each other's medicine. We know this. And when we have experienced any level of healing, we are not, as humans, content to stay there. All of a sudden our capacity increases for us to see other people who might be in that same situation, and we will go to them and say, hey, you're not alone. That is something that automatically happens. And it's why so many people in these helping professions have these high number of adversities that they can report, because they're not content to let things stay the way that they were. I want to show you this graphic really quick, because I think that it helps with giving a little bit of that context. Because if you look at the third part down on this pyramid, it says adoption of health risk behaviors, right? And it's that thing that this is where we used to start to say, why would people even do that? Why would they choose this thing? Don't they know that that's going to lead to disease, disability, or social problems, and probably early death? And they'll say, what a blank choice, right? So our language of judgment is going to be based in our histories, and it's going to be whatever that blank is. What a blank choice. Why would you do that? And what ACEs did is say, hold up, wait a minute. We need to go further back. We need to go way, way back in the history here and realize that there is something happening in that person's history around them, either in their family or in the history of that people group or in the community that they're currently in, that meant that there was not enough safety around them, and they experienced some of these adversities, and that changed how their brains developed because they weren't able to feel as much safety. They weren't able to experience the world in a way where they could be confident that they had a voice, that their needs matter, that they were precious. And that impairment shows up in their relationships. It shows up in the way that they can regulate their emotions or not, and the way that they understand things. And when we stay in a space of impairment, when we're not able to understand what's going on in relationship with people, and we don't get the joke, and we feel left out, and we feel like we're not seen, heard, and valid, or valued, or valid, that's too. Or if we can't regulate our emotions, and so people avoid us and places reject us because we are feeling big emotions because our brains are trying to keep us safe, our bodies are trying to keep us safe. Or if we can't connect things because executive functioning isn't forming well for us, or if things just don't make sense, we can only live in that space of feeling less than for so long before it becomes untenable. We can't stay there. None of us do, right? So some of us might reach for Ben and Jerry's because that's our best answer, and some of us, that's not the answer. That's not what's available to us. And what might be modeled or what might be readily available is going to be something that's riskier. I feel like what ACEs really did is provide this compassion point for us to say, it's not that something's wrong with somebody, it's that something happened to them. There was something that happened in the history, and it gives us this compassion to look at people and say, you must be having a really tough time. There must be something that's going on here. And you know what that helps me do? It helps me not to take things personal. It helps me not to have a stress response to someone else's stress response and make it about me, but it allows me to put that to the side and say, this is not about me and that poor baby. That person who's in front of me, they really, man, their behavior is telling me that they feel so unseen, that they feel so unknown, and they are desperate for someone to walk into their reality and say, you are seen. You're right. It's not fair. It shouldn't have happened this way. I am with you. I am lamenting with you. Right. And for people who are people of God, the God who is the creator of all is a God of compassion. And there's this verse in 2 Corinthians that says that God comforts us in our distresses, that he is that he consoles us in our grief and in our distress, and he walks alongside so that we can do that for others. And it's right in there. And you know what's not in that verse? God does not tell us what we've done wrong. God does not tell us that there's something wrong with us. God does not tell us that we don't belong. None of that's in there. The God walks with us and consoles us, right? And so we get this privilege of creating that space and realizing there's something that happened before I ever got there. And so I mentioned that my youngest is in Texas. And my youngest showed up with what we would call reactive attachment disorder, but they didn't want to call it that because they knew that we wouldn't go forward with the adoption. So it was attachment difficulties. And when she was approaching 3rd grade, her psychiatrist, psychologist, case manager, adoption social worker, and everyone on the team in our adoption agency wrote a letter and said, you need to spend 24/7 with her for about a year. She needs to have 24/7 emotional and physical proximity to you. if we're ever going to help her to develop attachment. And so I left my job and I homeschooled for a year, and we did about 20 hours of attachment therapy a week. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of work. But my baby, who's in Texas with my birth mother, in a very conservative environment, who is figuring out her Blackness, who is figuring out who she is as a 19-year-old, who I'm like, I love you. She's like, I know. Like, I know, I'm totally aware. But also we'll do the I love you more, I love you mostest, I love you bestest. Like, we have our whole litany back and forth. And I was talking to her, and she was explaining how she's at this working farm that my mother lives on with her new husband, and they it's wet now, so they have to wait, but they were harvesting hay, and she was saying that they were mentioning this person who was a farmhand who wasn't reliable, and that they were like, yeah, we would text him and he doesn't respond for a number of days, and he's supposed to show up and then he won't, and we won't hear from him until later. And he just, he just makes the worst decisions and choices. And my baby looked at them and said, I'm sure that there's some stuff that's going on. I mean, you said he was living with his grandparents, and he probably has some things. Like, he probably couldn't text. And my mom looked at her and said, you think that's okay? And my daughter said, I think we need to just be aware he's probably got some things going on. Right? That's a baby who has earned her secure attachment, who is able to look out with compassion, whose brain and body up during her early childhood has told her that people aren't safe, processes don't make sense. Don't talk to me about my future. I am just trying not to die, and I'm putting up walls, and I'm disconnected from humanity. She was disconnected from humanity. She was the one who we literally like, she may hold a pillow over our face at some point. I'm not even kidding. I know it sounds funny, but for real, we were really concerned. That baby, through relationship, through attunement, through having needs that are met and going through that hard work, is able to have compassion for somebody she never met and hold that in front of authority figures, right? To hold that space. She's advocating for somebody she never met and saying, we got to hold space. He is doing the best that he can, right? And so that is my, like, again, this, I only heard about this yesterday, so it's a new story for me, and I'm super excited about it. And she's like, oh, you tell everybody my stories. I'm just so proud of you. Look at you, look how you have grown, baby. Wow. But that to me is that's the type of lens I want to walk into the world with, is that unconditional positive regard, and holding that compassion to realize I get to be part of somebody's healing when I hold space for them, when I advocate just by holding space and saying, hey, everybody, let's stop our judgment. You just don't know.
I love that. Wow. Thank you for sharing your daughter's story and these concepts. I think, like, man, I hope that us as advocates are hearing the opportunity that we have to be even one small, maybe big part, we're not really sure, of her healing journey, right? And I love the positive regard and the compassion for her that, in these spaces, because we are human, I think we can really wrestle with and have moments of, do I lead with suspicion of her and her behaviors, and fear that she might be manipulative? And how do I hold compassion and believe the best in her, right? Like your daughter did. There's got to be something going on if we're seeing this behavior, this pattern, this reaction, or whatnot. And it is hard, I think, in a helping profession to not take it personally. And so I hope that this encourages us all to realize she is bringing a heavy load to the table. Her load is different. So how can we view her with grace, with empathy? And I love the language you used earlier, Renae, of to delight in her, right? Especially, and we could go everywhere, multiple different places with that, of it's not just enough to know that, like, you're loved by God, right? It's like, that's awesome. And that is good. And we're grateful for that. But to know that he delights in us is a very different relational experience, a value experience, that, like, oh, he actually just enjoys and he delights in me, and he wants to just be with
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Right. So how do we model that for moms? So not that we
Yeah.
have an answer, but I think these are things for us as advocates to keep chewing on, seeking accountability with, right? We're going to have moments where we're not going to feel like we're really delighting very well, and that's okay. So let's bring people in to support us in that. So as we approach our last 10 minutes, Renae, I would love to, I'm trying to pick which thing I want you to highlight because there's a lot here. You and I discussed that fear extinction event.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great way to just kind of bring all of this to a hopeful, resilient, oriented
Yeah.
close.
Absolutely. Well, and I in that fear extinction event, I'm going to tie in exactly what you're talking about with this unconditional positive regard. And I have the great privilege of being able to go around the country and speak about trauma and compassion and self-care and resiliency and all sorts of things in this space. And I get to talk to people around the world, and that is such a great privilege. And when I do it, that is when I feel God's delight in me, because I am moving fully into who God created me to be. When I can be my full and authentic self, and God's like, yeah, that's what I was going for right there. Right. And so it's not that whether I do it well or not, honestly, it's if I'm moving in obedience in what the space that God has created for me. Okay. And so it's not about performance, it's about like moving forward into that space. And so when we see that people are showing their real and true selves, the way that we can that can build on that is to respond to it. So I do this thing called the baby face. I'm not suggesting that you do this with the person that you're serving, although you might, but here it is. What is the face that we give babies? It's this one. Hello. Hello. Look at you. You are so precious. Look at you. Look at you. Oh my goodness. You are so precious. That delight, to be able to see people, right? And when I get to do this in person with people, and they at first they're like, and then I'm like, how did that feel? And I give them the mic, and they're like, it felt so good just to be seen. I'm like, you didn't do anything. You just showed up as a human. And I had this open affect and this gladness in my eyes to see you and this hope for you. And I'm like, you deserve this regardless of your behaviors, regardless of the things you have done and for the things that you will do. And if I can give this to somebody over and over and over again, right? If I can leave that space to say, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad to know you. You are brilliant and amazing, and you're awesome. What that does, those neural pathways that we talked about that are in that attachment cycle, that neural pathway of I don't have a voice, my needs don't matter, I am not precious. What that does is cause a fear event in people. There's a traumatic event that happens that says, if I show up as my full self, if I show up authentically, I not only do I not matter, but I am not worthy of love. I am not worthy of respect. I'm not worthy of being seen, heard, and valued. There's something that is terribly wrong with me. I need to hide. I need to cover that up. I need to mask. I need to hold that in. And the stress of trying to be what someone else wants us to be, that subversion, again, that's that toxic stress that starts to disintegrate the end of our DNA. But what was discovered a few weeks ago is that the buildup of certain parts of our DNA occurs when we have these fear events, when these events that say, you are not safe. You are not safe either. Someone's going to hurt you physically, emotionally, mentally, neglect you. Something bad is going to happen. Or you're not safe to show up as yourself, that you are invalidated. You are not, we don't want you here. You are not okay. That will cause us to have markers in our DNA that will have different health effects, right? And that different types of, just like we learned with ACEs, that different types of diseases or different ways that we respond to stress is that's being read in our DNA, in our body. It is affected by these fear events, that there's this buildup and we can't even see some of the choices that might be in front of us because of what's happened in our histories. Okay. And what the scientists discovered is that the way that we can heal that fear event in DNA is by repeated positive experiences in similar environments and same type of environments. It can actually switch the marker of the DNA, whether it's on or off. It changes the actual structure of the DNA. So we're not even talking about the ends. We're talking about active live DNA, where, because it goes either one way or the other as it's being read down that strand. And the structure of the DNA can be changed if we have these repeated experiences, right? It's called a fear extinction event. Is that if we are giving people repeated experiences in relationship, if they were harmed in relationship, and every single one of those ACEs is a betrayal in relationship, is a relational dysfunction, a breakdown of safety in relationship, if we can give them opposite experiences of safety, of being seen, heard, valued, delighted in, and known, we can change their DNA, and we can change each other's DNA.
Mic drop there. Oh, so powerful, Renae. I wish we had another hour, and we don't. And I think we all have enough to really chew on. So if I can do my best here to just tie this together. And I didn't see any questions in the chat. If you have a last minute question, please go ahead and type that in. I love Kristen's already like, I'm going to be listening to this one again. So we've recorded it. We will send it out. But I think it's like we are in the business of extinguishing fear, right? If that is one thing we can do in our advocacy relationship with mom, huge. That will change patterns, that will change generations, that will change her biology, her DNA, her stress response system, right? Like, I just think we underestimate the power of relationship all the time. We like chronically underestimate it, right? And so I love that we are honing in on the opposite. Like, we've got to give this more weight than most of us are probably sitting around and thinking about. And that we are each other's medicine. I love that you use that language too, Renae. So I hope as advocates, we're walking away realizing this relationship matters. How can I be a safe place for her? How can I find ways to delight in her in ways that she's also able to receive, right? There's some relational discretion here that we've got to learn and tune into her, me and her. I can't give you a blanket way to do that with each of your moms. And that when we show up and give her those repeated, safe, healthy experiences in relationship, we are also contributing to her overall resiliency. We want that for her. So whether we're one stop or we get to stay in relationship with her long term, I just want to always emphasize the power of relationship. Renae, is there if you could leave everyone with one thing that they can take away and apply from this, is there anything that I missed that you want to speak to?
I just want you all to realize and remember and hold on to that you are precious as well. That's it. At the center of all of this. And if that is a challenge for you to hear and accept, I want to let you know it's been for me too. That it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I was able to go through a really transform, as much as I taught about this and advocated for everyone else, and I believe in it, and I get to that part about, I am precious, and inside this little voice said, everybody but you, everybody but you. And I wrestled with it and wrestled with it, and going through this journey in the last 5 years of being able to root down in that. And so I'm gonna provide that for you here, and I know that you'll provide that for each other too. But you are so amazing. You're doing such great work. You deserve respect, to be seen, heard, and valued and delighted in. You are amazing. There is nothing wrong with you. You may have challenges. All of us have growing edges, but you are an amazing you. And that work, it will pay dividends for the people that you're serving.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing your heart and caring for our team in that way, while also equipping us to better support the women that we care a lot about. Ladies, thank you for joining us. This will be recorded. Let me emphasize that again. I will be sending that out and making that available to you. I also would love to point you to some of Renae's work at TraumaWise. So be looking for that in a follow-up email. As you can tell, she is a wealth of knowledge and she has a big heart. And she has great material where we can all keep learning and applying these principles. So always want to advocate for that as well. Renae, thank you for your time and your heart. We are better because of this, and we want to better walk alongside our moms as well.
Thank you, Lindy. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.